Hello and welcome everyone once again to another of the Church Solutions podcast. My name is Phil Thompson and with me today is Michael Gray. Michael, how are you?
Great, Phil. Good to be here today.
We haven't had you on for a while. Michael works with
Yeah,
us
yeah.
here, and you've been on a lot of podcasts, but not lately. You've been goofing off, working on your Jeep, probably, right? The deal.
Yep, yep. Breaking it, fixing it, breaking it,
Yeah.
fixing it. Just an endless cycle.
That's mine does that. Mine breaks, but it just sits in the driveway and breaks. Anyhow, uh, well, we're glad everybody's here today. Thanks for being with us today. And we have a very special guest. He's a good friend of ours. We've had him on here before, Dr. David Drum. David, how are you today?
I am well, thanks. And thanks for the honorary doctorate too. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you had a doctorate. I guess you have a master's. You
I
have a
do
master's.
now. So
Well, there
yeah,
you go. Well, hey, if I said it, that means it's true. Uh,
absolutely.
well, you should have a doctorate. You have been involved in ministry for well over 20 years. And I'm just going over your bio and you were a pastor at Trinity Lutheran here in Tucson, Arizona for well over 20 years. And you've been involved in other organizations as well for Tucson, which I think talked a couple times.
Yep.
And now you're with, is it J17? Is that what the name of it?
J17 Ministries. Yes.
Okay. All right. And you've worked. The thing I just love about you, Dave, is that you work with a large group of people from different theological backgrounds, different things like that. And you've written several books. Jesus, one of them is Jesus' Surprising Strategy.
Yes.
The other one was If It Was Easy, Jesus Wouldn't Have Prayed for It. And what we want to talk about today is your new book called Peace Talks. Peace Talks, the good news of Jesus in a donkey elephant war. And this is very timely because at the time of this recording of this podcast, it's November 11th. The election happened, a week ago, a little over a week ago.
Yep.
And it seems to me like our country is more divided than ever.
I agree.
And so we want to throw some questions out here to you. This book, Peace Talks, the good news of Jesus in a donkey elephant war. So many of viewers and listeners to this podcast are pastors or, associate pastors, executive pastors, key volunteers in their local church,
Yep.
people working in tech, or tech, been doing this for a long time. I hear this book, The Good News of Jesus in a Donkey Elephant War, Peace Talks. So if I'm one of these listeners right now, I probably have my mind made up about where I politically. This is one of the things that just honestly grieves me. It really does, because I work with not just people, but I'm involved in my church. And I know people on both sides of the political spectrum.
Yep.
And it just frustrates how angry people get and how divisive people are. But, if I'm one of these people listening, not saying that everybody listens is divisive, but if I'm a listener right now or a viewer, why should I even care about this book, Peace Talk? I know what I believe about politically and this stuff. Tell me more. Why should I look at this book?
Well, here's one reason. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," among other things. So we ought to care about being peacemakers. And certainly an area where we need peace maybe as much as any is in the arena of politics. A second reason might be that many of us have uncomfortable conversations that happen in our own living room with our kids or our aunts and uncles. Thanksgiving is coming. Thanksgiving can be one of those meals that people dread because Uncle so-and-so is going to drop the political bomb and we're all going to squirm and it's going to be uncomfortable. And so lots of us have that kind of experience. And so if we could learn how to navigate those waters in a healthier fashion, we could enjoy our pumpkin pie more at the end of the dinner. So it gets eminently practical. But maybe the best reason of all is that in John 17, Jesus prayed that we would all be one so that the world would notice. I've looked really, really closely, and there are no footnotes in that prayer that say except where politics is concerned. That's there. That out is not in the prayer anywhere. And there are believers, solid, mature, Jesus loving people that we could get along with, pray together with, worship together, have a wonderful time with, who are in both parties. And when we firebomb one another, we are hurting the unity in the church, as well as preventing the world from seeing the church lead and be the light on a hill. We've got such a tremendous opportunity in a divided world like this. One more comment just to finish up that question. It takes something bigger than the gap to bridge the gap. And that gap, that person, that something is the person of Jesus Christ. So that's the good news of Jesus in a donkey elephant war. He can help lead us through the impasse that we experience personally within our churches, as well as a country.
Okay. I'm going to turn Michael loose on you here in just a moment, but let me just look at some of the chapters here just for people. You've got chapters. One of them is casualties of war, how we got here, which I think is interesting. That'd probably be my next question here. Our Western worldview problem, which I totally agree. We have a real problem with our worldview here, living in the West. And
Yep.
I mean, when I mean West, and then identity theft, Jesus' surprising priority. How we got here. Let me ask this question, and Michael, I'll turn it over to you after Dave eloquently answers this. How did we get here?
Well, in that chapter and the two subsequent chapters, I identify 7 different factors that have contributed. Technology is a piece of the picture. Most of our communication is via social media these days, and social media tends not to bring forth our highest and best selves. And so we have a way, it used to be when email came out, I remember some of the training that said, when you're getting ready to write a snappy response to an email that you just got, pause, wait, don't send that email. And most of us learned that lesson the hard way. With social media, you don't even have to compose the answer. All you do is hit like or forward, and you are firebombing all sorts of folks that you aren't even thinking about. You aren't at all thinking about the person receiving the message. You're just living in your echo chamber. And so a couple of the factors have to do with the role of social media. I learned a term from my son. My son actually wrote the chapter, How We Got Here. My son has a very different political and spiritual worldview than I do, but we've learned how to talk together the hard way, but we've learned, and we do really well together. And so I invited him. He offered, he wanted to help with this project. And so I invited him to write the chapter. And I learned a term in the process. When we talk about news media used to broadcast, and news media now narrowcasts. All news media picks a slice of the public, and it's much more lucrative to their advertisers to know who you're advertising to. And so news media has dramatically changed in the last generation over where it was. So those are 2 factors, social media and news media. The advent of technology has dramatically shifted the landscape over the last generation. And foreign countries, a third factor, it's well documented that foreign countries have decided that our political partisanship weakens us as a nation. And so they've chosen to enter into the fray just to further fan the flames. And I've actually got a picture of one of those fake ads from a fake group that's in the book that was used during the 2016 political campaign. So that picture's in the book. My son helped do some of that research. So
That's awesome.
yeah, it's then there's some theological reasons why we're so divided. So we look at 7 different factors that got us to where we are.
That's great. So as I was going through that section, there's really some juicy, great understanding there. I just recently watched The Social Dilemma.
Yes, so did
And
I.
so it's so poignant. It literally parallels what you write in your book about the fact that advertising is driving algorithm of social to deliver bias to people who already have a certain bias.
Yep.
So if you lean one way or the other way, the algorithm, because that's how they get paid, is keeping your eyes on their page,
Yep.
is going to continue to feed you with whatever bias you have.
Yep.
And so that's the wedge. Then so I had several questions I think you're going to answer, but I was really stunned this year that people unfriended me who've been lifelong friends because they assume I have a certain perspective about everything because of the kind of work that I do. We didn't have conversations. We didn't argue. We didn't talk amongst ourselves as posts, but it was an assumption. And we were so divided all of a sudden that I was unfriended, and I stepped back and I said, number one, what did I do? And I want to be careful in that.
Yep.
And number two, how did we get here? Your chapter was just really great. As I'm looking at that data, it's really exceptional.
Yeah, there's a lot of data in there. I did a lot of research for this book. So there's like almost 500 footnotes in the book. I did a lot of work for this project.
I could tell.
Yeah. So I was talking just yesterday with a pastor who was going to be meeting last night with a group of people that were going to leave their church because of their assumption over the political stance that was being portrayed. And this is a church that is exceptionally careful to not take a political stance that would divide and alienate the audience. You can't really be much more careful than this church is. But we've just got to recognize that this is not just a national problem. This bleeds over into the body of Christ. And we've just, the church, if the church doesn't lead, the country has no chance. I don't believe. But it's weakening the church also. And so it's a very relevant topic. Most pastors know how volatile politics is in their congregation. And most churches have a mixture of people. Even if one side is in hiding, they're there. Most churches have that. And so, boy, if we could learn how to reflect the principles, the prayers, the priorities of Jesus in the way that we do politics, it would make such a huge impact.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I was going to ask you that, Dave, in the context of, and I appreciate in your book how you gave 2 chapters to how do we as Christians and how do we, capital C church, deal. So very practical. Here are some things that you can do to begin to mend the fence, heal hearts, etc. So could you point to some of that?
Absolutely. So all of that was born out of practical experience, both within my own family, as well as in my job now for almost 10 years. I've had the privilege of working full time for greater unity in the body of Christ. And one of the great joys of my life, a group that has just made such an impact on me, is a group of African American and Anglo pastors that meet together monthly It started during the 2012 presidential election campaign. And so that was President Obama had been in office for 4 years and was running for re-election. And so the presenting question that started this group meeting together was essentially, is our unity in Christ sufficient that we could talk as Black pastors and white pastors about politics and live to tell about it? And the answer has been a resounding yes. We've met together monthly now for over 8 years and have become deep, deep friends in the process. And we learned a little phrase by trial and fire in that group that's just 3 little words that if we could just adopt that perspective, it would make such an impact. Here they are. Help me understand. Help me understand how you go to the ballot box. Help me understand what your life experience has led you to prioritize when you think about politics. Help me understand how you're processing this last week. Help me understand what you're seeing with the Black Lives Matter movement. Help me understand. It's just a posture of listening. It's a posture of humility. It's the kinds of things that the New Testament talks about a lot, that one little question can make a difference. Many of us have young adult children who probably see the world differently than we do. It works in that context. Help me understand what's important to you in life. And so we've used that question when we've processed through Ferguson and the riots, when we processed this summer through what happened to George Floyd and the rioting taking place in different cities and political and social unrest. And help me understand what you're seeing, how you're processing it. And we have learned a ton in that process. If we could just use that as a leading question in conversations with people who are different from us, those conversations would go a whole lot better. So that's a super practical thing that every one of us could use.
That's good. That's really good stuff, Dave. We're talking with David Drum, author of the book Peace Talks. And Dave, you've got a chapter that says our Western worldview problem. Is that part of what you just are articulating there? Does that fall into the Western worldview problem? And you obviously you can't give a real long answer here because of time, but
right.
What is our Western worldview problem, and how do we get out of it?
Yes, this is a massive oversimplification, but in a Western worldview, we tend to default to either or, and in a biblical worldview, it tends to land on both and. So, for instance, Jesus is both fully human and fully God. That's a both and. We tend to think of the conflicts because we tend to land on an either or perspective. That's just one example among hundreds that we could give. In politics, we tend to approach it as an either or competition. But if we could see it as a both and, I use the analogy in the book that we're like passengers on an airplane. And blowing up the other side of the aisle is a really, really bad idea because the whole plane's going down if we do that. And if we could see, especially believers, because there certainly is a worldview contention going on in politics, and there are some worldviews that we could not adopt if we're going to be Christ followers who place value in the scriptures. But let's just talk about believers in both sides of the party, in both parties. Believers who tend to vote Democratic. I've got a chapter called Donkey Favorites and a chapter called Elephant Favorites. And I take 3 issues that believers in both parties that are some of the major reasons why they tend to vote that way, because of those biblically based issues that each party tends to prioritize. So if we could see that as a both and instead of an either or, we could achieve some solutions in the country that right now are elusive. You have to decide, for instance, if you're pro-life, are you pro-life for the unborn, or are you pro-life for both sides of the race issue or both sides of the immigration issue? Which pro-life are you? You kind of have to choose, because the choices dictate one or the other, but not both. That's the Western worldview problem that forces us into an either or, when the Bible would point us in the direction of both and.
That's great.
How do you know, this has been going on probably over 100 years,
Yeah.
maybe longer, right?
Yeah.
And it's just getting progressively worse. How do we put the brakes on this either or deal? I mean, what's the key to us seeing a breakthrough? Is there actually hope that we can get out of this downward spiral before it comes too late?
Yeah. Well, my training, I learned a lot in the research for the book on political science and some of that kind of stuff, but that's not my training. My training is as a pastor and a peacemaker, a bridge builder. And so let's start there. This issue is impacting our immediate families, as we talked about with it's impacting our churches. Let's start there. Sit down over dinner and have a help me understand conversation with people that you already know. Build a bridge. Let's take the polite dinner time conversation rule that says the two things that you should never talk about over dinner are religion and politics. And let's throw that right out, because if we can't talk about it over dinner with people that we already love, that we already know, then how are we ever going to learn to talk about it anyplace else? So let's learn some, and the book has some very practical suggestions on how to do that, like the Help Me Understand one. Let's begin practicing having civil conversation and actually learn some things from people who have a different political view than we do. But especially when we love the same Lord, we ought to be able to do that. Jesus is bigger than the gap that divides us. So let's rely on our common unity in Jesus and take somebody to lunch from our church who has a different political leaning than we do and practice having some of these conversations. If that were to happen all across the country, we would see some solutions emerge and politics would be done differently. You would find more candidates who, if more of the electorate was looking for unifiers when they went to the ballot box, you would find more politicians who would be unifiers, because they're just looking for votes. So it's on us in our country. We influence who we end up electing. So we can be part of the solution here and make a difference, but it's going to start one-on-one. It all boils down to relationships. And so that's something that the church knows about. We can do that.
Absolutely. You've got a chapter called Identity Theft in the book. Now, I know what identity theft is. You know, we're a tech company and we help people do streaming and log into things and log out of stuff. What's identity theft have to do with this book, Peace Talks?
So as I have watched people that I know and love Facebook firebomb other people, and these are otherwise mature Christian believers, and it's like, how does that happen? How on earth can we just throw out everything that we know when it comes to politics and just land in the gutter? How does that happen? I contend that it's a case of identity theft, and we are over-identifying with our political parties and under-identifying with our primary identity, which is that we are children of God. And so that chapter is the most autobiographical chapter in the book, because in fact, Michael Gray, you are quoted in that chapter because I use the life map that we did together. And that exercise that you have us draw our spiritual health in each of these different seasons of life, and mine look like an EKG, and it goes up and down and up and down. And I realized that every single time that my health was plummeting, it's because I was over identifying with something secondary. And
Oh,
every
wow.
single
That's
time
strong.
that my health was going up, it's because my identity was focused on what's primary. And that was the big revelation of those 2 days with you. And so the first half of that chapter is just mining that. And so I tell my own story. And here's where I over identified with denomination. And here's where I over identified with ministry or career at the expense of my family. And on and on and on. And so I use 3 different examples in my own personal life. And then I list a whole bunch of other things that we can over identify with. And then I drop the bomb. Most of us over identify with politics. And we need to put it in a secondary. In fact, it isn't even secondary. It's secondary. Like way down the list of things that we ought to be identified with. But I think that's a root cause of our issue, because if we get defensive when we're talking politics, that's a surefire indication that we've got some of our identity wrapped up in it. Otherwise, it's just an exchange of ideas, and we wouldn't be defensive over that. We can exchange ideas all day long if our identity is not tied up in it. So that's the issue of that chapter. Many people who've read the book have said that was their favorite chapter in the book. And probably it's because there's just lots and lots of stories in that chapter.
Yeah. But your story about Africa, as you led off, and their identity theft that lead them to murder so many people, while calling themselves Christians, was just, I just hadn't heard that story in that context before. I knew it was history. I knew it happened, but I didn't know it was amongst a country that considered itself to be a Christian country. And had left the top identity behind for other
tribal
identities that were.
And I dare say that we're not far from that. I was praying very specifically that we would not experience revolution in our nation, regardless of which side won the election. There was the real possibility, and we're not 100% out of the woods yet, although it's looking good. But there was the real possibility that we could be we could be Rwanda. Maybe not quite that bad, but I've never even considered that possibility before in my lifetime. That we could be looking at another civil war in our nation. And we're not far from it. If we don't get a handle on this, if we continue down the trajectory that is more and more divided, with more and more violent rhetoric, and throwing around terms like, well, the other party declared war on us, so it's time for us to declare war on them. And I've got that quote in the first chapter. My goodness, we're in dire straits. But the church can lead. The church can make a difference in this. And that's the good news of Jesus in a donkey elephant war.
Certainly is. Well, and it's such a contrast in that our other civil war, the awakening was driven by the church in something that was horribly wrong.
Yes.
And in this case, what could you point to that is just so catastrophically sinful and wrong that there is no right, there is no winner. In the
Well, I think
context of
it's a
taking sides.
hyper partisanship that demonizes the other side. Even
Mhm,
on issues where there's a clear biblical mandate,
mhm.
the people on the other side are motivated by things that in most cases that we would say are godly issues. So let's take maybe the most divisive of all, and let's just throw it out there. Let's talk about abortion. The people who are pro-choice are motivated primarily, not exclusively, but the vast majority are motivated by a care and concern for women. That's not a terrible thing. So we could have a help me understand conversation that could bridge even that, which is such a strong dividing line between pro-life, pro-choice when it comes to abortion. You could have a help me understand conversation even there. And so if we can do it there, we can do it anywhere.
Yeah. I've actually had some of those with some people, and you're right. It's very helpful. Very helpful. Hey, we're out of time, guys. I'm sorry, but we are. So the book is Peace Talks, and it's called "The Good News of Jesus in a Donkey Elephant World War." Let me read that again because I screwed it up. Peace Talks, The Good News of Jesus in a Donkey Elephant War. David Drum is the author. David, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
My privilege. Great to be with both of you.
Well, it is good to be. It's good to see you again. And tell us, how can people get a hold? First of all, how can they get the book? How can, because this is really, I really feel very strongly about this. I think people involved in ministry, especially, should read this book. How do they get it?
So it's available two different places. It's on Amazon. You can get it there. It's available through my website, which is just j17ministries.org, j17ministries.org. There's a study guide that you can download for free, or if you want us to send you a pre-bound copy, it's $5 for the study guide, but it's designed for small groups, and there's small groups around the country that are studying this book together. And so whether in a small group or just with your young adult child, you could do this together and make some headway. So yeah, j17ministries.org is the only place you can get the study guide. There's also some group discounts available that you can't do through Amazon. So either place will get you the book.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, man, we're out of time. Thank you, David Drum. Thank you, Michael Gray, for sitting in on this. Steve Lacy will be back with us next time. I'm Phil Thompson, and please take care of yourselves. This has been the Church Solutions Podcast. We'll see you again next time. Adios.